was what I like to call shiny. And so, I had this polished persona. Got the good grades, had the friends, was in the activities. But inside, I was dying. There was so much pain. A kid cannot be fully themselves if there's not the safe container.
Today's guest is someone I'm excited about, Stacy Schaffer, MA, LPC, a dedicated children's therapist in Colorado with more than 20 years of experience helping kids, teens, young adults, and families. Specializing in grief and anxiety, she creates a safe space for healing and hope, which is what we all need, and advocates to destigmatize mental health.
I think that we are missing teaching a lot of coping skills, in order to earn, if you will, that resiliency. There's one thing about coping in a healthy way, and there's another idea of shoving it down. And I think that that's what happens a lot because we don't know what to do for our kids, and we're like, the kids are fine, right?
Thank you so much for joining me today, Stacy.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. Obviously this work, resiliency, coping, we're talking about that today. We're going to chat a lot about that, maybe some misconceptions, what we should be teaching our kids. But before we continue, tell me what the impetus was to write that book of yours, Children's as a Love from a Children's Therapist.
Yeah. So, like you said, I've been in practice for quite some time. And so there were a lot of things that I was hearing over and over from kids and teens that I was like, I want this information to get to the greater world. Because, there's the limits of confidentiality. If, you hurt yourself, someone else is hurting you. But there were a lot of things that fell in the gray. And I was like, therapeutic care, it shouldn't be, but it's a luxury in our country.
Yeah.
And I want people who will never have access to hear these conversations too. And then about a decade ago, I started doing my own healing work. And I was like, oh, maybe I can take some nuggets from that. And so, voila.
I love it. And, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is the term resilient, what it actually means, what we should be really teaching our kids. And I think we hear the phrase a lot. Kids are resilient all the time. And it's usually meant to reassure the adult. Why do you think we overuse that phrase? And what do you worry that it can allow adults to skip over when kids are actually going through hard things?
For sure. I think that it's a buzz phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me want to stand up on soapboxes and be like, yeah, but what are the adults in therapy talking about? Their childhood. And so I think that we've gotten used to it as a term that makes us feel better. The kids are fine. And
yes.
Really, what other choice do they have? They to carry on. But I think that we are missing teaching a lot of coping skills, in order to earn, if you will, that resiliency. Because I feel like there's one thing about coping in a healthy way, and there's another idea of shoving it down. And I think that that's what happens a lot because we don't know what to do for our kids, and we're like, the kids are fine, right?
Yeah. And do you feel like it's more so that when we say that the kids are resilient, that then the parent is not actually teaching them about real resiliency and what that looks like? Or do you think it's just like a band-aid of hey, he's going to be okay. We don't need to deal with this issue, or they'll just get through it?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a combo, but really, we as the grown-ups, we weren't taught skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we carried on. It's different now. There's more social emotional learning, but I feel like a lot of it is just feeling inadequate about how to support our kids. We're just well, I don't know, toughen up, little buddy. And I'm here for you, which, I'm here for you is an important phrase to say, but it's what does that mean? What can we offer our kids in a better way so that we're just not shoving it down so that 30 years from now, they're talking about that incident in therapy.
Yeah. And what are some of those things that we should be noticing when we're accidentally using that phrase and noticing maybe they're going through a hard thing? What can we do that maybe can actually build true resiliency in that moment?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times we want to rescue our kids from the situations, they have Yeah, there's a wide spectrum of issues, right? Like there's one difference between being like horrendously bullied and a kid doesn't like you in class, because people are allowed to not like you.
Right.
And I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, we don't want them to be in that particular environment. So we're like, we'll take you out of it because we are observant parents, and we will save you from that. When really in that particular scenario, just what I've come up with the top of my head, in that particular scenario, a better way would be like, here's how to stand firm in yourself. Here are some like mental strategies when they're being irritating. Here's how to remove yourself like at lunchtime from the table, instead of like completely revoking access to anything hard.
Mm. And I'm just curious if for someone who's listening, what would be your definition to describe what true resilience should be in a child?
I think that resiliency is the not only the belief that you can make it through anything that like comes your way, but also the ability to know what to do in
Mm.
hard situations and who to go to.
Mm, such a good important nuance at the end about how we can get through hard things, but that we don't have to do it alone. Because
Right.
that to me is, like you said, true resiliency. And
Yes.
adults need that as well. Because I think when we talk about this whole label of kids are resilient, I think a lot of adults can feel the same way that they have been labeled as resilient because a lot of their parenting when they were younger was like brushing it off. And so now they're like, well, yeah, I'm resilient. But are you sure you're really resilient, or are you sure you're not listening to your actual feelings that are lying underneath, and know that you can rely on other people, that you do not
Right.
have to do it alone?
For
And do you
sure.
feel like that's the mistake that's being made, is that we're thinking that kids are capable of handling it alone, and that because we put that label on them of, oh, you're resilient, it's fine, that they feel like they have to handle the world alone?
Because as adults, we weren't always equipped with how to handle scenarios
Yeah.
that we really, obviously nobody wants their kids in pain. And
Yeah.
so we want them out of pain as soon as possible. And sometimes that pain is a mirror to what we didn't get or what we needed when we were younger and didn't receive. And so I think that the more work that we do as adults, like to do our own therapy, have our own authentic relationships, show up as much as we can, that ultimately benefits our kids, and they are able to have a model of, I can do hard things and be okay, and also I don't have to shove it down, because
Yeah.
like spoiler alert, it comes back in other ways and outside ways.
Mm. And we're going to get into obviously some of your own experiences dealing with coping versus resilience. Like, was it actually coping or was it resilience? But before we get into that, when people talk about resilience, it can often seem like it's a personality trait that kids either have or don't.
Mm.
But do you feel like it can be learned? And how is it actually formed over time? And why are we so important as the grown up in these children's life to help cultivate it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like you live long enough and you go through something hard, right?
Yeah.
Like that a lot of the hard things that we deal with are not predictable. So we as humans try as hard as we can to have predictability because it makes us feel safe. But
Yeah.
there are things outside the box that happen. And so I think that, how issues and how trauma and challenging things, like it lands different for everybody based on a million things, temperament, and demographics, a lot of things, right? But I think that it's important to know the kid in front of you,
Hmm.
um, in order to see like, okay, like what kind of support do they need? Because I know for me, I never found myself in a textbook
Hmm.
ever. And so it's like the people that like could have, should have supported me needed to know the kid in front of them in order to best support.
Mm. I agree, and you have said your own experiences have sort of inspired your book, inspired the work that you do, and you've shared openly about your own traumatic childhood and how you navigated it. Looking back, what parts of your coping do you think were mistaken for resilience? And what do you wish the adults around you had understood or done differently?
Yeah. I mean, I was what I like to call shiny. And
Mm,
so, I like had this polished persona. Got the good grades, like had the friends, was in the activities. But inside, I was dying. Like
yeah,
there was so much pain. But I think it's important to note that a kid cannot be fully themselves if there's not the safe container.
yeah.
I had my most favorite teacher in high school, amazing. Left me a review on Amazon that made me sob. So amazing. But she alone wouldn't have been enough to support me because I didn't have a safe container around me. And
Mm,
so I think that it's so beautiful. I respect so much the parents that bring their kids to counseling that are listening to your podcast because they want to do better, right? They're like, help, I recognize I don't know everything. And I think that is the first step. I want to know better, do better, help me.
I had done another podcast episode about like 3 things that I think every parent should have, and one of them is humility, and the other one is understanding that you are not perfect, and
Right.
I think that is a really hard skill for a lot of adults, and it's something that I think when people think about humility, and it's a great example of what you just mentioned, that you do not need to be the best, and you may need to help your child in ways that support them, like going to see a therapist, getting them help through a hard time. That is not making you any less of a parent. That's actually making you a better parent to realize there's an issue. I can't handle it alone. So now who are my resources to help me cultivate this for my child? And I think that humility has made me a better parent. I think it's helped cultivate that resiliency in my child too, right? Like cuz he
Right.
sees, like I think more about my 6-year-old who's really absorbing all of these concepts. Like he sees that if I can't figure something out, my husband can't figure something out, we are going to help him. And so, I often joke about this, but sometimes people will threaten on social media like, oh, that person's going to need therapy. And I'm like, why are we looking at therapy as such a bad thing?
Right.
Like, therapy is a good thing. And I think and every single adult and human in this world could benefit from a quality therapist. Like,
Absolutely.
I mean, you think about all these things that have happened, right? The copings that were mistaken for resiliency and all of this baggage that we carry. So I don't look at it as an insult. I look at it as like, hey, if my kid ever needed a therapist, the best thing I can do as a mother is to support him and say, "Hey, I did the best I could, but I can't control everything, but what I can help you with is getting you the support that you need." And I think would you agree that that's one of the components of creating that resiliency and that safe space and container?
Absolutely. And I think that what's beautiful about your child's generation
Yeah.
is that the stigma is changing.
Yeah.
Like I'll go through with kids, like if you see me in public, I can't say hi to you, can say hi to me. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, you might be with a friend. They might be like, who's that? Why does she wear so much purple? And those are questions you can't answer because, like, I don't know. And they're like, but why wouldn't I just say you're my therapist? I'm like,
Yeah.
you can. And so I think that they are having more awareness of that. And at the same time, like parents will call me and say, I think I broke my child. And I'm like, first of
Mm,
all, your kid's not broken. Second of all, your kid is being raised by humans, so there is a margin of error there. Like the fact that desire to do better is, in my opinion, more than half the battle.
yeah. I love that you just phrased it so simply. We're raised by humans and humans are fallible. Like, again, because I do a lot of parenting guidance, right? My content is very parenting focused, and I'm in the process of writing my own book, which is a beast. No, which is a huge beast. I mean, it's so stressful.
Oh,
I love it, but it's like, man,
it's
like
yeah,
it's,
it's
but
what?
but part of it is like, again, the fallibility of humans and trying not to be perfect. Like, that's not the goal. Like, the
No,
goal is to know what you know and know what you don't know and understand that you are a humble person that I can't do this thing alone. And that's I think where success happens as a parent, not knowing and reading every book and saying, "Okay, I'm going to do this the right way," because there can be variances to the right way.
absolutely. And I try not, my mom died in 2001.
Mm, okay.
And so like a lifetime ago, same year, September 11th.
Uh-huh.
And so things could have evolved, and you would hope they would have. But if my mom had had a a podcast, like listen
Mhm.
to a podcast, a book, got some like humility with like parenting support about not being perfect, the entire trajectory of my life would have been different. And that's why
Yeah.
I'm so passionate that I'm like, I want kids to have a better experience than I did, and that like these parents are like, what can I do to make my world better so that my child has a better world? And that's so
Mm.
beautiful. Like, are you kidding? It's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's so beautiful, and it seems when me and you are talking, it seems so easy because I think we both have that insight now. But why I'm so grateful to have these conversations on the show is that someone is consuming this and saying, "Oh yeah, like I could do this differently," and that's the point of the podcast and my
Yeah.
platform. It's like not judgment, not anything more than how can we be better people, not only for our kids but for ourselves as well. And I think you're doing that work. The next question I have is, a lot of kids who are described as strong or easy don't always ask for much, right? Like that well behaved kid, society may say, wow, like they're just so good. What are some red flags that a child's so called resilience, good behavior, such a good kid might actually be a sign that they're coping alone or shutting parts of themselves down?
Yeah, it's a good question. I see a lot of kids. So I, specialize in anxiety. So I see lots of anxious kids, and I see lots of perfectionist kids. And it is interesting to, they're going along in their life, and then there's like a B on a test,
Mm,
and they fall apart. And a parent will be like, but that's not the expectation at home.
mm,
And I'm like, it is their own internal drive. And so I think that like if you're paying attention enough to your kid and you see like that like a surface is scratched and things just are really, really dramatic with their responses, that to me is a flag. I hear it literally every day, and kids are like the mental toll that it takes to not be perfect. And so I think I love the idea of teaching kids that that's not the goal. Like
yeah.
perfectionism, because it's not real. It is absolutely not real. Like I like a kid, young kid was having this like embarrassing challenge to him that the dad was talking about, and I said, it was related to the body, and I said, did you know that I broke a couple of teeth in my sleep because I was so anxious, and now I have this mouth guard? And the kid's like, what? And I was like, because I'm not a perfect human.
Yeah.
Like, because I have a body and things can fall apart. And the kid's like, you had that? I'm like, buddy, if stick around for a while. There's a lot going on in here. But I think to model to kids that yeah, things can happen, things can go wrong, and the structure of you're still okay. You're okay. And so I think having those conversations that it's really the perfection is not ideal and not the goal because it's not real.
And in terms of like the signs that they're maybe coping alone, right? So perfectionism might be a way of how they cope with the world. Is there any other things that show that they might be shutting themselves down or coping alone when they actually might need help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to look at like your kids' support network.
Mhm.
That the research shows that one adult outside of a parent that's invested, a safe adult, like can change the trajectory of things for a kid. I think if there's not anyone that your kid is getting like older support from that you trust, it's hard to know if your kid isn't talking to you. I think that just the reality is that we all have feelings and we all have needs, right? And so if your kid is not communicating any of those to anyone, that's
Yeah.
probably something to look at.
Mm. Yeah, very true. I think about my own childhood, I was a perfectionist. I was labeled that very resilient, independent kid. And not to say that you can't have a resilient, independent kid who's truly resilient, and independent, but what I lacked was that sort of emotional support for failure. What I lacked was that emotional support of understanding that I don't have to be perfect, the people pleasing. Like, I mean, there's just so many characteristics that came down, or the shutting down of parts of my identity, which was I was a very vocal person, meaning I was very like I wanted to stand up for people, stand up for things, and that was often shut down by my parents, but it was
Mm,
definitely parts of me that just weren't able to be myself. And then as you get older, you sort of realize like all of this sort of, oh, she's such a good girl. She's so, she pays attention. It was my anxiety, it was my perfectionism, it was my rule following that made it really hard to cope as I got older and was like,
yes.
dang, life can't always support that sort of behavior.
Correct. Yeah, and I think it's so tricky because we like live in such a fast society. So there's
Yeah.
just so much going on at all times, and I don't want parents to feel anxious like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm missing it." I
Yeah.
think, that if you're attuned, like at least some of the time, like I think the research shows that like 20% of like being attuned 20% like can make like the biggest difference. Obviously, you'd like more, but I think being like in touch with the people that you care about is never a bad thing.
Yeah. And one other thing is that I think I see a lot in my generation. I would hope this is going to change and maybe our conversation can help is that when kids face hard things, parents often want to jump to fixing or minimizing. And there's
Hmm.
that sort of happy balance in the middle, in my opinion, right? Like being able to get that art of like letting them figure it out. But again, as we talked about earlier, knowing that you are there if they can't. I mean, that is kind of
Yes.
parenting in a nutshell. At the most fundamental level, what do kids actually need from adults to cope with adversity in a way that supports their long term emotional health?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you said that. I believe it was last week, a social media carousel about arguing with people about their feelings and how that's
Mm.
like not a good idea. And it made me think because I went through this hard thing and I had a friend literally argue with me about what I was feeling, and I was not feeling seen. They were trying to give me examples that had nothing to do, and they were a well-intentioned, thoughtful, amazing friend, and they were missing me. And so
Yeah.
like I wrote in this carousel, that happens to kids all the time, because I think at the fundamental level, we all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. And I think seeing and hearing someone does not mean you have to agree. That my friend could very well, and obviously did, disagree with my experience, but I wasn't, she was missing me. I was not being seen in that. And so therefore I shut
Mm,
down. I didn't want to talk about it anymore because
yeah.
of like you're not seeing like the thing that I am dealing with, and you are arguing against it. And how often do we do that with kids? No, 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 you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. No, you'll make new friends. We Some of those things can
Yeah.
be true, but we're missing a good chunk of like, and so I like a good directive to say, help me understand what it's like to be you. Help
Yeah.
me understand that. Because I think that the generations obviously change, but kids today are dealing with things that generations before did not. So when you say I was a kid once too, you're missing your kid. You're missing your kid because
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities of like curfew and rules and all those things, but it's a different time. Have you been outside? It's
Yeah.
different.
On social media, the academic pressures, I mean, there's definitely a different world, and I feel that even just by raising kids that are younger, I have, like, a school-aged kid and a toddler, but, no, I feel that. So my feeling is that kids wanna be seen and heard, and that's what parents tend to forget to do. And, kinda my example that it runs in through my head is, like, when a kid falls, like, I do believe there's a very, very important medium of, like, not over exaggerating and being like, "Oh my god, my poor baby," but also not being like, "Hey, just doesn't matter." Like, "Hey, it's okay. Come over here. Is something hurting you?
Mhm.
Do you need me?" Like, that to me is that happy medium of, again, you said it
Yes.
beautifully, like, meeting them where they are. I think a lot of the mistakes I'm seeing, and I'm curious if you feel the same, is that we tend to put our own insecurities and our own feelings into their situation. So, like, let's say if a peer rejected them, we get into this sort of, oh, you must be so mad, or oh my god, I need to fix it for you, rather than just doing what you just said is, how does this feel for you?
Right.
What are you feeling? What have you done? And then guiding. I think there's just so much inability to just step back and say, I can support you without fixing you, and I can support you without minimizing your experience.
Right. Yeah, because I think a lot of times that parents are like are trying to fix things that they needed, which,
Yes.
like there is like some wisdom in that, but approach is everything. I have a kid that like something that they wear, a parent is afraid they're going to be bullied in junior high, and so they're like, I feel like my parents not seeing, like they're not saying it like this, but I'm afraid my parent isn't like seeing like me because they just really don't want me to be who I am, because that is what they're hearing.
Yeah.
They're like, they want me to be different, and I'm not going to be bullied because I'm like stronger than that. And so I think it's so hard when we try to insulate our kids because they live here. They live here.
Hmm. And so, for parents listening today who want to do better but feel unsure, if you could leave them with one shift in how they think about resilience, coping, support, what would you want them to take away?
I would want them to say, the first thing that comes to mind is to have some conversation that and I say this a lot to kids, like when they're telling me about a scenario. I'm like, if you, let's say you had this conversation again with this person, they couldn't talk back, they would actually hear you, they can't argue with you, and you're going to be heard, what would you say? And like it's amazing. Kids are profound, they're like, well, actually I would say, but they're not going to say the thing because of all of those like relational consequences. So I would say, what would it be like if you had a conversation with your kid and you kind of introduce some of those things? Like, you're like, everything is you're not going to have consequences. I'm not going to bring it up passive aggressively later. I'm going to hear you. What am I missing? I feel
Hmm.
like that could change things dramatically for people.
Mm, so good. Stacy, thank you so much. Now, I always ask my guests these now because I just love hearing your perspective. What is something that you're excited about in your life right now, and what is something that gives you hope?
Something I'm excited about in my life. I'm working on making a course,
Love it.
um, and about kids and social media. And so I'm really really looking forward to that. What gives me hope, I like, is this generation of kids.
Mm,
They're amazing. They're absolutely amazing, and they know terms that I'm like, what would that be like? They don't always use them correctly
yes.
because not everything is gaslighting, kids. Not everything is
Yes.
gaslighting.
Yes.
But it
Or
gives
not everything is a trigger or
no.
trauma.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Like, just because you saw on TikTok doesn't mean that's your diagnosis.
Yeah.
But like that, that parents and kids, like that, we're increasing daily with like social emotional learning, and that gives me so much hope. It gives me so much hope because it's a different world than I grew up in, and so my hope is that kids have consistently less hard times than generations before.
Thank you, Stacy. I love that. That was so sweet. Thank you so much for that answer. And for everyone tuning in, where can they go to stay connected, get all your resources, learn more, get your book?
Yeah. So my website, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes because there's a
Hmm.
million ways to spell my name. But it's stacyschaffer.com. And on my website, there's a free resource about 5 things parents need to know in 2026. You can also get the first chapter of my book on my website, or have a link to my book. And there's a way to contact me. And my Instagram is Hope Restored.
Thank you so much. You have restored hope. And I love that that was the last question I asked you. I actually didn't connect that because normally I ask that question to a lot of my guests lately about the hope, but you are restoring hope with these conversations. Thank you so much, Stacy. This was an amazing conversation today.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
And for people tuning in, you again are watching this on our YouTube channel right now. Please make sure you subscribe. Please make sure you give it a thumbs up sign. Ask questions if you want to learn more. Maybe I can have Stacy back on the show. We always love to hear the guests that bring you hope, bring you joy, and make you learn something at the same time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I cannot wait to have another amazing conversation next time on the show.